On the night of June 6, 1992, three women walked out of a graduation party in Springfield, Missouri. They were laughing, they were safe, they were together. By the next morning, they had vanished without a single trace. No bodies, no blood, no witnesses, no struggle, just three women, gone, as if the night itself had swallowed them whole. But the real story is far stranger than a disappearance, because everything investigators found at the scene pointed to something that should have been impossible. And 30 years later, not one person has been charged, not one credible lead has been confirmed, and the women have never been found. This is the story of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McFall. This is the Springfield Three. It was a Friday night, the kind that feels infinite when you are young. Suzie Streeter had just graduated from Kickapoo High School. She was 18 years old. Her best friend, Stacy McFall, was the same age, bright-eyed and fearless in the way that only the young can afford to be. The two girls came home to Suzie's house on East Delmar Street, where Suzie's mother, Sherrill, was waiting. Sherrill was 47, a hair salon owner, a woman her neighbors described as warm, careful, and deeply devoted to her daughter. The three of them were last seen alive at approximately 2 a.m. By morning, they were gone. It was Stacy's boyfriend who first sensed something was wrong. He arrived at the house that afternoon expecting to find Stacy. What he found instead was a front door standing wide open, the television on, the lights burning, and three purses sitting exactly where their owners had left them. He called the police. When officers arrived, they searched every room. The beds had been slept in, or at least pulled back, suggesting the women had made it home, felt safe enough to settle in, and were taken or lured away some time in those quiet hours before dawn. There were no signs of a break-in, no broken locks, no shattered windows, no overturned furniture. Whatever happened inside that house happened quietly, it happened quickly, and it happened in a way that left no visible resistance. There was one strange detail. The porch light fixture, the one just outside the front door, had been broken. The glass globe was shattered and sitting on the ground beneath it. It was unclear when it broke, it was unclear how, but investigators noted it, photographed it, and moved on. They would come back to that broken globe many times in the years ahead. They always came back to it. Criminologist Brent Turvey, who has studied the case extensively, has noted that the absence of physical evidence in abductions of multiple victims is extraordinarily rare. When three people are taken simultaneously, the statistical likelihood of a controlled, evidence-free scene drops dramatically. Whoever took Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy, if they were taken, exercised an unusual level of control. Either that or they were known. Either that or the women left willingly. That question, willing or unwilling, has haunted investigators for decades. The neighborhood on East Delmar Street was quiet. It was the kind of street where people left their windows open in summer, where children rode bikes to the corner and back without a second thought. Residents interviewed in the days after the disappearance reported nothing unusual. No screaming, no car doors slamming, no raised voices, nothing that interrupted the ordinary silence of a Missouri night. And yet, three women were gone. The investigation that followed was, by many accounts, deeply flawed from the beginning. The crime scene was not properly secured. Dozens of people, neighbors, friends, family members, curious onlookers walked through the house before forensic teams could fully process it. Potential evidence was disturbed. Potential trace materials were compromised. By the time investigators understood the full weight of what they were dealing with, the scene had been contaminated beyond recovery. Former FBI criminal profiler and author John Douglas, whose work on behavioral analysis revolutionized how law enforcement approaches violent crime, has argued that the first 48 hours of a missing persons case are the most critical window for collecting actionable evidence. In the Springfield 3 case, that window was not used effectively, and the cost of those early failures would be measured in decades of unanswered questions. A tip line was established. Hundreds of calls poured in. People reported suspicious vehicles on East Delmar Street that night. A man seen walking near the house in the early morning hours. A truck parked at an unusual angle. Every lead was followed. None produced a suspect. None produced a witness who could place a specific person at the scene at a specific time with enough certainty to hold up. One name surfaced again and again in those early years, a man named Robert Craig Cox. Cox was already in prison in Florida for an unrelated kidnapping conviction when, in 1992, he reportedly told another inmate that he knew what had happened to the Springfield 3. He told investigators he knew where the bodies were buried. He told them the women were dead. He told them he would never be charged because the bodies would never be found. Cox has denied involvement over the years. He has never been charged. No physical evidence has ever connected him to the case. But his name sits at the center of every serious discussion about what happened on East Delmar Street. Not because the evidence points to him conclusively, but because his behavior has never been satisfactorily explained. Why would a man in prison with nothing obvious to gain claim specific knowledge of 3 missing women and then go silent? The question has no good answer. Most questions in this case have no good answer. What researchers like criminologist Enzo Yaksic, who studies serial offender behavior through the Atypical Homicide Research Group, have noted about cases like this is that prolonged evidence silence is itself a form of evidence. It tells you something about the perpetrator. It tells you they were either extraordinarily methodical, extraordinarily lucky, or extraordinarily familiar with their environment and their victims. The Springfield 3 case fits all 3 profiles simultaneously, which makes it nearly impossible to narrow down. There is a theory, one that has never been proven, but one that keeps surfacing, that the 3 women were taken by someone they knew, someone who knocked on the door at 2 a.m. or after, and someone whose presence at that hour did not alarm them. Someone Sherrill Levitt would have opened the door for. Someone Suzie and Stacy would have recognized. Because here is what the evidence tells you, stripped of everything else. 3 women who were home, who had their purses, who had their cars parked outside, who had given no indication of planning to go anywhere, simply were not there in the morning. The most logical explanation is that someone came to them, someone they either let in willingly or someone who forced his way in so quickly and so quietly that no one heard a sound. The broken porch light has never been explained. Over the years, the case has attracted substantial public attention. Television programs have revisited it. Independent investigators have retraced every step. A private investigator named Cheryl Donahue spent years working the case on behalf of the families and told reporters that she believed the women's remains were located in the Springfield area. that they had been buried and that the burial site had simply not been found. She named no suspects publicly. She shared her evidence with law enforcement. The case remained open and cold. The families have not stopped looking. Stacy McFall's mother has spoken publicly about the case numerous times over the decades, describing the particular cruelty of not knowing, not having remains, not having answers, not having a grave to visit. Grief without finality is its own kind of disappearance. You keep searching because stopping feels like abandonment. Investigators have pursued dozens of searches over the years: fields, warehouses, construction sites, former farmland on the outskirts of Springfield. Each search was accompanied by cautious hope and followed by silence. Nothing has ever been found. What the Springfield 3 case forces you to confront is something deeply uncomfortable. It forces you to confront the idea that proximity to violence is not a factor of geography or circumstance. Sherrill Levitt lived on a quiet street. She was home with her daughter. She was surrounded by her daughter's friends. She was, by every reasonable measure, safe, and she vanished. Criminologist Kim Rossmo, whose work on geographic profiling has helped solve cold cases around the world, has written extensively about the way communities process unresolved crime. He argues that unsolved cases create a persistent shadow, not just over the investigation, but over the physical landscape itself. Streets remember. Neighborhoods carry the weight of what happened in them, even when no one can say exactly what that was. East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri, is that kind of place now. The house where the 3 women lived no longer stands as it did. The neighborhood has changed, but the weight has not lifted, because the case has not closed. 30 years of phone tips, 30 years of searches, 30 years of names surfaced and dismissed, of theories formed and abandoned, of families waiting for a knock on the door that still has not come. And somewhere, in a field, a foundation, a place no investigator has thought to look, the answer exists: physical, concrete, real. The earth does not forget what it holds. Women walked out of a graduation party in Springfield, Missouri. They were laughing, they were safe, they were together. The world has been looking for them ever since.